Hi, welcome back. Now that you've created a namespace and namespace attributes, the next step is to create a namespace segment and a campaign. To create a namespace segment, click on the namespace link. A namespace segment is a population of users or events that can be targeted in a campaign. A segment is a dynamic and reusable set of filters and conditions to group users and events. Data that meets the criteria for a defined segment will be automatically added to the segment. To create a segment, enter a name in the namespace segment field. I'll create a segment to target my opt-in users. To target the specific group of users or events, we can use event filters and conditions. Event filters evaluate incoming data based on events or a time frame. When creating an event filter, you can choose which events you'd like to target, the newest events or the oldest events. And you can choose to target events, or you can also choose to target a time frame. In this example, I'm going to look at the last event. Once you've created your event filter, you can click the Add Event filter. It'll add it to our event list below. Attribute filters evaluate incoming data based on an attribute value. The attribute drop-down list contains the attributes that we created when we created our namespace. Depending on the data type of the attribute that you choose, you will have different operators available to you. For example, if I select an integer attribute, my operators are is not, less than, greater than, or has any value. Once I select an operator, then I can add my specific value. For this example, I want to look at my opt-in status. Opt-in status is a text data type. So the operators that are available to me are tailored to the text data type. In this example, I want to choose has any value. And I'll add my attribute filter to my list of filters below. In addition to event and attribute filters, you can also create conditions. Conditions evaluate incoming data based on an attribute metric. You can create a specific condition that must be met in order for this event to be added to our segment. Again, we have our list of namespace attributes for us to choose from. Again, based on the attribute type that you select, you will have different reductions and operators available to you. For this example, I'm going to look at my opt-in status. In this example, I want to select the newest event coming in. I want to look at my opt-in status attribute, and I want to select a specific value for my opt-in status attribute. So I'm going to select the is operator. My value will be yes. Once I've created the condition that I'd like to use, I can click the Add Conditions button. Once I've added my condition, the condition will be added to the table below. Now that I'm satisfied with the filters and conditions that I have set up, I can click the Add Rule button to add this rule to the rules table below. Now you can create as many segment rules as you would like. You can create as many event filters or attribute filters or conditions in a specific rule, or you can create many rules. It depends on the type of targeting you'd like to do. Once you're happy with the rule that you've created or rules, you can click the Add Segment button. And your segment is now added to the list here. Once we've created our segments, we can go ahead and create a campaign now. We can click on the New Campaign button in the navigation bar. To create a campaign, we need to name our campaign. Again, this would be something that would make sense for your organization. For this example, I'll create a campaign that I'd like to send to all of my customers in California. Once I've named my campaign, I can choose when I'd want to start and stop this campaign. Starting immediately is the default value. I can choose to start my campaign on a specific date by selecting a date from the calendar. I can choose to schedule it later. I can also decide when I'd like to stop the campaign. You can also choose to delay a message transmission if you'd like to send a message at a later time after an event was received. You can select the time frame here. For my example, I'll start my campaign immediately. Okay, now click the Next button. The next step is the message content. The message content can be a URL. It can be a text notification. It can be JSON payload. With Cogs, you have many options. Now, if you're sending a push notification to an iOS or an Android device, you can also customize some of the properties here for iOS and Android here. For this example, I'll send a push notification message. Once you have the content established, you can click the Next button. The next tab is the Audience tab. This is where you define who will see this campaign. On this page, we can set up the message frequency. You can show any time a qualifying trigger is detected, or you can show only once, depending on the type of campaign. You can choose to expire a message. If there's time-sensitive material in your campaign and it's no longer relevant after a certain amount of time, you can expire a message based on a time frame here. The next section is the Show To. In this case, selecting the whomever triggers this campaign will send this campaign to everybody that triggers the campaign. If you'd like to get specific, you can target a segment. Earlier, we created a segment for our opt-in status. I'm going to select that segment and add that to my segment list here. In the next section, you can exclude segments. If you previously defined segments, you can exclude them here. Excluded segments would not be eligible to receive this campaign. In the section below that, you can also exclude anyone who saw a specific campaign. In this case, we don't have any previous campaigns, but if we did, we could exclude any user that saw those campaigns from receiving this campaign. Once you've defined the audience for this campaign, you can click the Next button. The next step is to set up the rules for this campaign. This is where you can define the triggering criteria for this campaign. The rules functionality is similar to creating segments. You have event filters, attribute filters, and conditions. You can choose no rules if you'd like. But if you'd like to define rules, you can enter a description here. For my example, I was going to send out a campaign to all my customers in California, so that will be my description here. For my event filter, I'd like to look at the last event coming in. And for my attribute filter, I'll choose the state attribute that I created earlier. And I want to make sure it has a value first before I evaluate this rule. And now I can define a condition. I want to look at my state attribute again, and I want to look at a specific value for my state. In this case, I'm going to choose California. And I'll add my condition. Once I'm satisfied with my campaign rule, I can click the Add a Rule button here. It'll add my rule to the list below. Again, you can create one rule with many event filters, attribute filters, and conditions, or you can create many rules, depending on your needs. Once you're satisfied with your campaign rules, you can click the Finish button. You'll be taken back to the My Campaigns tab, and this shows you the status of your campaign. Now that I've created my campaign and my campaign is active, as events come into Cogswell will be evaluated, and this campaign can be triggered. If I need to make any changes to my campaign, I can edit my campaign by clicking the Edit button. I can go in and edit all aspects of my campaign if I choose to. Once I've made any edits I'd like to make, I can click the Save button, and my changes will be active. If I need to make changes to the campaign start and stop dates, I can right-click on my campaign, and I have choices to stop the campaign, complete the campaign, or modify the schedule. Congratulations, you've created your first campaign. Join me again in our next video where I'll demonstrate how to use our Java testing tool in our iOS test app.